Is it over for the Diamondbacks after a bad series against the Dodgers, or is this just a bump in the road on the way to the playoffs? We're going to talk about it. It's another edition of Southwest Bias.
Get that stuff out of here. It's Southwest Bias.
As always, brought to you by our friends over at Desert Financial Credit Union, Arizona's #1 credit union named by Forbes. And if I'm going to talk Diamondbacks, I might as well bring the whole Diamondbacks crew from PHNX D-Backs. I've got Derek, I've got Jesse, and even behind the Mac, I've got the dog, Damon Dawg, Bark Bark. We are all here, and we are talking Diamondbacks. Unfortunately, I wish it was under better circumstances, Jesse, because not the hottest weekend for the Snakes, was it?
It was not. No, the Diamondbacks lose 3 out of 4 to the Dodgers, and especially the Monday game was very pivotal. It was not only the difference between being 4 games behind the Dodgers in the division versus 6 games, which is where they are now, but it also was the defining game in the season series between the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. So the Dodgers win the season series. They also hold the tiebreaker. The D-backs probably would have had to win 3 out of 4 in order for the division race to look compelling. Obviously, they were not able to do that. But by losing 3 out of 4, they've also put themselves in a bit of a precarious position. I mean, they're still certainly in a good spot to make the playoffs. I think Fangraphs gives them something like an 85% chance to make it. They're still in a pretty good spot, but their cushion on the New York Mets in the wild card race is down to 3 games. So things definitely got a lot more interesting over the weekend.
Is it panic time, Derek? Are you sweating a little bit?
I would be panicked if for some reason this was like the Diamondbacks at 100% with Ketel Marte and Christian Walker, maybe just a little bit. Even then, like Jesse said, the 85% chance of making the playoffs still does not cause me to panic. It's the Dodgers. You want to beat the Dodgers, but I think that the thing that the Diamondbacks deserve more credit for is actually how good they've been in the absence of Gabriel, Moreno, Walker, and Marte, right? Like, we're disappointed that they lost to the Dodgers, and they did have a chance there on Monday to split the series and kind of even out the way that those first 2 games went. However, you got to give credit where credit is due. This team is down some of their biggest offensive threats, and they've stepped up, and they've still, been very good over this stretch without those guys. I think this is just a case of it catching up to them. The Dodgers offense was very good. The starting pitching for the Diamondbacks was bad in this series, and I think if you're talking about anything that concerns me right now, it's the starting pitching.
Well, and I think you make a good point of like, hey, there are positives or negatives to take with it, where, yeah, this is a team that's been battling through various injuries throughout the entire season. And on top of that, you finally get your starting rotation back, more or less. And it's not working out the way that you want it to work out. But Jesse, you can talk about like, hey, listen, you're down 3 of your best players offensively and defensively in Walker, Marte, and Moreno. And your starting pitchers were, let's say, leaving a lot on the table, a lot to be desired. And sure, you dropped 3 out of 4, but you were in a majority of these games, and your offense was still able to carry, including the 1 win of the series, putting up 14 against the Dodgers, who waved the white flag about 3 innings in. So there is some hope, right? There's something good to take away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the offense continues to put up runs for the most part. I mean, I know it was they lost by 5 runs on Monday, but they still scored 6 in the game, right? 6 runs against the Dodgers, you still generally feel good about that. And even over the course of the entire series, I mean, the Diamondbacks, I think if you go even the entire homestand, with the Diamondbacks going 2-5 total between their series against the Dodgers and their series against the Mets, they scored the exact same number of runs as the Mets and Dodgers combined in those series. They're still scoring a lot of runs. They average more than 6 runs per game on this homestand. But I think the issue for them, going back to what you guys were saying earlier, is the starting pitching and the fact that, Merrill Kelly was the last guy to return for them. He came back on August 11th. The Diamondbacks rotation has been completely whole ever since Merrill came back on August 11th. And yet this rotation has an ERA of 5.56 since Merrill Kelly returned on that day. That's worse than it was before. And the Diamondbacks on the season now have the 3rd worst starting rotation ERA in all of baseball. In a lot of ways, it's remarkable that they're still in a pretty good position. Yeah. I mean, it's not really normal for a team to have a starter's ERA of nearly 5 and still find a way to be in, a good spot to make the playoffs come September.
Damon, is this as simple as, hey, just get your pitching together, and this is a team that is a force nobody wants to see in the playoffs, or does it go deeper than that?
I mean, I think they have the bones of a team that can have a deep playoff run. We saw it last year. I think we talked about it a lot last year. Like, you have the front line starting pitching. You have a deep lineup. You have a good defense, good base running, a proven manager, I'd say, at this point. But you need those frontline starting pitchers to pitch like frontline starting pitchers, or you're not going to be successful in the postseason whatsoever.
It's funny he brings up the manager because
I was actually going to ask you about that.
Well, I was just going to say, can you imagine how Diamondbacks fans would have reacted to Torey Lovullo giving up on a game the way that Dave Roberts did in that game 3, right? Like, they already at times come for Torey quite a bit when it comes to things like that. And it is because as a manager, you have to worry about your bullpen and you have to worry about the games going forward. You can't just worry about that particular loss. So as much as it might drive fans nuts that a manager would do that, I mean, you see your team getting blown out. It doesn't make much sense to leave your guys out there if you can figure out, hey, let's just wave the white flag on this one. The way the Diamondbacks have been scoring, though, they shouldn't wave the white flag on any game. I mean, that's why in game 1, the score ended up being 10-9. The Diamondbacks scored the majority of those runs late, and they were able to make a game of it. This team has led the majors with 17 games this season of scoring 10 runs or more. And that's something impressive, and that makes this offense not a fluke. This isn't just, oh, hey, every once in a while they score a lot of runs. No, this team is an offensive powerhouse. It's just right now a matter of getting the pitching right, for especially on the starting pitching side of things.
And you do have pitchers that have proven themselves to be locked down, really, really good pitchers, but are just struggling. You would maybe think, hey, give them some more time, adjustment period before the playoffs, and that can correct itself. I do want to go back to Torey and the managerial part of it, and I'm gonna pose this to all of you, but bouncing it back to you first, Derek. I am more of a casual Diamondbacks fan than you three here, who are in the weeds every single day, doing post games, doing live shows and everything. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot about how Torey has handled this bullpen, Paul Sewald, and fans not being thrilled about that. Sure. Is that a frustration that you share or see where they're coming from?
Maybe at times, maybe a little bit, but I will say that I personally have seen the progression with players that Torey has taken his time with and given them opportunities, and how that has basically transitioned over into them playing very good baseball, right? And so it's easy as a fan or as a talking head like us to sit here and yell about Torey making the decisions that he's making. He still sees a lot of value in Paul Sewald. And I know that's hard for somebody, for a lot of people to see that, but he still sees it, right? So in his mind, he's trying to get Paul Sewald back to a point where he was. This is the fluke of Paul Sewald is more of the way he's performed lately, not that he's now a bad pitcher in Torey's mind. Torey does give his players, maybe to a fault, that kind of opportunity, that amount of respect when they've performed in the past, and proved to be a guy that can handle, those opportunities at a major league level. I will say that there are some times, though, like my thing that drives me nuts is when Torey approaches a game differently with who he's going to use, for instance, out of the bullpen, based on if they're up or if they're down. And I think that's silly because, like I said earlier, the way this offense has played, you're not really down when you're down by 1 run. So you shouldn't manage the game differently because you're down by 1 run. You should try to keep it at a 1-run deficit as much as possible, because your team is going to probably turn things around in the next 2 innings. And that's the way that's what's frustrated me about Torey as manager.
Are you sharing the same feelings, Jesse, or are you coming at it from a different perspective?
I think I understand where people are coming from for sure when they talk about Torey and his managerial strategy. I mean, I go to Friday's game was one in particular that people were not happy with. D-backs were down by a run, and in a key spot in the 7th inning, Torey goes to Paul Sewald as opposed to Kevin Ginkel, who had been warming up earlier in the game. And what really made it a bad look is that Kevin Ginkel still wound up pitching in the game a couple of innings later when the deficit had grown to 5 runs for the Diamondbacks. It was like, well, if you're going to use him anyway, why didn't you use him in the more important spot? And that game, I do understand where people are coming from. There are some nuances there that we touched on in Friday's post-game show where the D-backs were shorthanded in the bullpen. I think Sewald was probably going to pitch at some point in that game no matter what. So even if you did go to Ginkel in the 7th inning, you probably would have been going to Sewald in a potentially higher leverage situation later in the game. But yeah, we do see Torey in general operate in this sort of paradigm where we're either up or we're down. And if we're up, we're going to use the high leverage guys. And if we're down, we're not. We're going to go to the others. And unfortunately for the Diamondbacks throughout most of the season, there's been a really big gap between their high leverage relievers and some of those other guys who are kind of filling those middle innings for them. And it's led to, a 1-run deficit turning into a 3-run deficit or whatnot, or a 5-run deficit, as was the case on Friday. So I do understand the criticisms. I think especially in a series against the Dodgers, we touched earlier on kind of how important this series was for the Diamondbacks, especially, if they were going to win the NL West, it probably had to start with a better showing over this past weekend. And yeah, you could make a case that Torrey should have been more aggressive with his bullpen usage, specifically in this series. I don't think anything he did was egregious necessarily, but I see where people are coming from, and I think it's a fairly valid argument.
So we'll take a break in just a second. I do want to get Damon's opinion on all of this, because I think you both have made very interesting points just about how a manager kind of has to walk that tightrope as well, as far as believing your players, especially in a sport like baseball, where, there's very, very streaky players just in general. Even some of the best. Corbin Carroll, NL Player of the Month, wasn't playing like that at the beginning of the season, right? But you have faith in him, and you put him in spots where you continue to ask him to succeed. Damon, you mentioned earlier that this team has the bones of a good playoff team, a team that can make a deep run. And last season, a huge part of that was Torey Lovullo pulling the strings. Do you still feel confident that he can be the same guy to make the right decisions in those moments to get the best when the pressure and the leverage is at its highest in the playoffs?
I think with Torey last year in the postseason, it really felt like he was King Midas, where every single decision he made was just the perfect call.
He could do no wrong.
100%
for most of it. Yeah.
It was pinch hitters, it was pinch runners. Every move he made was working out the right way for the Diamondbacks, and that's a lot of time what you need in the postseason. You need luck on your side. You need momentum on your side. My problem is I don't have problems with Torey believing in players. I think that's what makes him the manager that he is, and it makes him why players want to play for him so bad. But my issue is more so with when you see Paul Sewald. I believe he's 34 years old. He's throwing at a lower velocity than what he was last year. He's not locating his fastball very well. His command used to be, the reason that he was the pitcher that he was. Now he's putting it more in the middle of the plate, throwing 91-mile-per-hour fastballs. Like, this is a guy that feels like he could be on the downturn of his career to me. And that's where I think you have to be a little bit more cutthroat. Because I understand it with a Corbin Carroll, comes off a Rookie of the Year. You need that. You need him to figure it out if you're going to reach your ceiling. But to me, it feels like a guy like Paul Sewald he's now on the downturn of his career, and it's time to be cutthroat about that kind of decision.
Yeah, you have to be put in tough spots. I mean, that's why you get paid a lot of money. That's why you're a manager of a Major League Baseball club, right? You have to be put in this position where this is a guy who was so critical to you reaching the World Series less than 365 days ago,
I also think what Torrey says at times in the media is different than how he's actually going to manage the team. I've said this on our show, but I think that that's more of an encouraging statement for Paul Sewald to get Paul Sewald confident in himself. But his actions clearly have been that he's going with Justin Martinez late in games in high leverage situations. So despite the fact he says he wants Paul Sewald in that role, right now the man in that role is Martinez, and it's the guy who rightfully should be in that role based on the performances he's had this season.
Sure. I mean, listen, managing any sort of team is not easy, especially one like the Diamondbacks, where there's so many moving pieces and parts, and there's highs and there's lows. It's all over the place. Sometimes it's just hard to make the right decision, but somebody who makes the right decision easy to make is our friends over at Empire today. Because if you are going to be picking out a new floor for your home, your condo, maybe you own an apartment, you want to renovate somewhere in your office, you don't want to make the wrong decision. Right? And how nice would it be for, let's say, Torey Lovullo, if before he put Paul Sewald into close, he could see what it was going to look like? That would be nice, right?
That would be extremely
great.
nice.
Oh, man, yeah.
Wouldn't that be great?
To be able to check out like an app where you were like, how Paul Sewald going to do tonight? Yikes. All right, I'm not going to go with him.
Or he's going to be great. Let's
Or
put
he's
him
gonna
in.
kill it.
Empire today has a virtual floor visualizer to make sure that you make the right decision when it comes to your floors, because I cannot imagine how awful it would be if you go through the entire process. Even though it's easy and quick and convenient with Empire, that's still a really big decision. And you're going to save some money if you go to Empire through us. but it's still going to be a big financial decision as well. You don't want to make the wrong one. Not only is a virtual visualizer there for you as well, they have staff that are going to make sure that you pick the right type of flooring for you, your lifestyle, and what you're trying to achieve. You can schedule a free in-home estimate today, and all listeners can receive a $350 off discount. That's massive when they use the promo code PHNX. Some restrictions do apply, but see empiretoday.com/PHNX for details. And of course, Southwest Bias is brought to you by our friends over at Desert Financial Credit Union. I've been using Desert Financial Credit Union my whole life. My parents have been using it their whole life, and my grandparents used it from the moment they moved out here just about 85 years ago, which is how long Desert Financial has been around. They have your basics, your checking, savings, mortgages, loans, credit cards, investment options, and more. And they have so many fantastic locations with fantastic people who are going to help you out and make sure that you are putting your money in the right place and in the right way. I know I have gone into so many different Desert Financial locations as I've lived across Arizona, and the service is always top notch. They're always there to help you out, even with the smallest of problems. And on top of all of that, how often, Derek, do you go and put your money in a place and they say, hey, how about some free money? Would that sound nice?
Most of the time, no. They just want more of my money.
Right. They just want you to put it in there. But Desert Financial is different because right now, if you open up a free checking account online, you get $200 in bonuses. All you have to do is visit desertfinancial.com/200 and you can spend it with either a Sun Devils card or a Cardinals card, or they also have the classic desert landscapes and whatnot. So you have all those options over at desertfinancial.com/200. Okay, well, we talked about this team and the Diamondbacks. We talked about what plagued them against the Dodgers, what's kind of plaguing them at this moment. But let's take a wide-scale look at not only the NL West race, but the wild card race as well. Jesse, after the series against the Dodgers, is it safe to say 6 games back from the NL West lead with about 24 games to go in the season? That's pretty much out of reach at this point, right?
Yeah, it would take a small miracle. Not a small miracle. It would take a rather large miracle at this point, yes.
And so if that's out of reach, Derek, but the playoffs are still in there, there's no reason to just check out after this series, right? Like there's still very much every single game matters, every single win matters.
Yeah. Right now, the Cubs are playing incredible baseball. I mean, they seem unstoppable at this point. They are about as far back in the from the wild card as we are in the division. Yet, for some reason, that seems way more scary than the idea of the Diamondbacks catching the Dodgers in the National League West being a possibility. The Dodgers don't lose a lot of baseball games. And at this point, I don't even think that should be the Diamondbacks' main concern. Their main concern needs to be getting to the playoffs. And again, they have played some really good baseball with the components they've had, but they will be getting Ketel Marte and Christian Walker back here shortly. Right. And I think when they get those guys back, you'll see this team kind of running a bit more on all cylinders. I also think, honestly, after watching this series, Gabriel Moreno has missed more than ever, and it's not just his bat. It's what he's doing behind the plate. Mm-hmm. The Diamondbacks have that to look forward to. They have guys coming back, but they still have to weather the storm right now. They have to get through this stretch. They play, I think they have 2 more series with the Giants, 2 more series with the Brewers. They do have a series with the Rockies, which, again, that's kind of a trap in there because the Rockies, once again, have been playing good baseball. You don't want to, again, look at this stretch of teams that like the Giants and the Rockies who are kind of out of the playoffs and take them lightly. This is where the Diamondbacks need to win games, and they finished their season with a very tough series against the Padres. And that's the team who they could end up playing when the playoffs come around. So we could be seeing basically 3 games and then another 3-game series right away in the playoffs with the Padres.
So let's set the scene, right? National League wildcard race. The Padres are in that first wildcard spot, 79-61, 3.5 games up. Diamondbacks 77-61, 2.5 games up. And the Braves 74-63, just a half a game above the Mets, 3.5 above the Cubs. Now, out of all of the teams that are either in the wild card race or, again, below the wild card race, the Diamondbacks have the best run differential by far. It's 92 to the next closest is 70 with the Padres. And like you mentioned, Jesse, this offense has been absolutely electric at so many different points this season throughout missing so many players. And being in the playoffs is the number one goal because what you saw last year was it didn't matter that the Dodgers won the NL West.
Correct.
Right? Who went farther in the playoffs? Once you hit the postseason, listen, everything is up in the air. All you have to do is get in. You just have to get in through the door, and then the rest is up to you. And I remember mentioning this on one of the last Diamondbacks postgame shows I filled in on, but having some rest for your players like Ketel Marte, even though that's hurt his MVP candidacy, which is really hard, but if you look into the postseason, into the future, he's going to have some fresh legs under him if he comes back fully healthy. Same thing, Christian Walker. Same thing with Gabriel Moreno. Those are 3 players they're going to rely on heavily. Damon, it's not a far stretch to think that if the Diamondbacks find their way into the playoffs again, which they are poised to do, that this could be a team that is almost reminiscent of last year, where they put it all together at the right time, because the story with the Diamondbacks has been some pretty low lows countered with some pretty high highs. Yeah,
and I think the one major pushback I'd have on that is that Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen were pretty automatic all season last year.
Yeah.
Like, you went, the back end of the Diamondbacks rotation last year might even have been worse than it is this season. But
both pretty bad.
True, but I think honestly, like, the run we've had from Ryan Nelson recently, that's better than any run that Ryan Nelson or Tommy Henry had last year. I mean, it's more about getting those guys up to snuff. We talked about it earlier, but I mean, they were automatic, like I said last year. Pretty much felt like every time Gallen or Merrill was on the mound, it was a D-backs W. This season hasn't been that way. And if the Diamondbacks are gonna have a big postseason run, that is a necessity. It's so integral to that run.
Ryan Nelson feels like the automatic W lately, which is wild to say. Of all the starting pitchers, Ryan
Although
Nelson,
they did still lose his last start against the Mets, but he did pitch very well in that game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he lost his Rays start as well, where he gave up like 1 or 2 runs in that game.
Yeah, he's not getting the run support he deserves, but it is kind of wild to think that Brandon Pfaadt and Ryan Nelson have been the real 1-2 punch for this team, while Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen have been inconsistent at best. Zach Gallen, though, has really shown that he's back. It's this weird thing with his fastball command. And I mean, even in that last start that he had in this series, he was not, it wasn't that he was awful the whole time. It was just, he started off really bad and it took him a while to get things on track. When he was good, though, in that game, he was amazing. And I mean, it was the Zach Gallen you'd hope to see all the time and that we have seen consistently over his career.
And I think that's such an interesting dynamic, considering this is an offseason where, Diamondbacks fans, media members, they are like, wow, look at the money that's being invested in this starting pitching rotation. This could be one of the best pitching rotations in the MLB. If you just look at it, who are they bringing in this offseason? Because you already have Merrill, you already have Zach, then you add Eduardo Rodriguez, and you also had Jordan Montgomery, which obviously that has gone completely off the rails as well. It's interesting to sit back and be like, hey, it's actually the offense that throughout all of this has carried it. And even once you get past the injuries, the starting pitching has been leaving a lot to be desired. And so I'm going to just ask one thing from each of you, the biggest key for the Diamondbacks to not only have a successful end to the regular season, but to make a deep run to the playoffs. I believe, Damon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is Zach and Merrill being aces like they were last season.
Yeah, for me, that's just what it comes down to. I trust the back end of the bullpen, the high leverage guys. I trust the lineup. I think if they're healthy, like with Gabby and Christian Walker back, I trust the defense, even though it's been pretty rusty recently. But to me, it's just about those starting pitchers and whether they can play like how we know they can pitch.
Is that the biggest key for you, Jesse?
Yeah, I think it has to be. I mean, it's really tough to keep doing what the Diamondbacks have been doing for a lot of the season, which is winning games despite lackluster starting pitching. But at the end of the day, I mean, I look at a list of Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly and Eduardo Rodriguez and Ryan Nelson with what he's done lately and Brandon Pfaadt, and I see a lot of talent there. And I think for me, that's the reason why, looking at the Diamondbacks roster compared to the Mets roster, to the Cubs roster, and the amount of ground that those teams would have to make up, you still feel pretty good about this team's chances in the long term. I think that this starting group is going to figure it out. Maybe not all 5 guys, I mean, with Merrill and Eduardo in particular, shoulder injuries are scary. We talked about it throughout the season. You don't know what you're going to get necessarily when guys come back from that, but you get the sense that, at least one of those guys is going to, find a rhythm sooner or later. But, we'll see what happens. We've got a few weeks here left to go.
Making it a triple, Derek. That's your biggest concern.
I mean, my biggest concern is that the Arizona Diamondbacks are never, ever going to spend money on starting pitcher ever again. And I mean, honestly, when you look at what's happening and how this has gone for them, you can see a case why there are teams like the Tampa Bay Rays and the Miami Marlins that don't really ever want to invest big money in their players. It feels like you're going to have a guy like Ryan Nelson or Brandon Pfaadt that comes around and ends up starting pitching better than your main guys. Like right now, I'm confident in what those guys are doing. But yes, the big concern there is Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen. And I don't even know if it's Zach Gallen as much, because I do feel like Zach Gallen is just kind of close to putting it back together. I mean, Merrill Kelly, he was just such a reliable starting pitcher for this team throughout the playoffs and just throughout the season last year. The Diamondbacks really need him back. And I think that's the big key. Really, I mean, it's kind of wild, but we have no idea what this starting rotation is going to look like if they do make the playoffs.
Yeah.
But
Ryan Nelson,
can you
game one?
imagine Ryan Nelson not being a part of it right now? And then that's just crazy to say, because you already moved Jordan Montgomery to the bullpen. What else are you going to do with the guys in the rotation now?
I mean, listen, if there's one thing I've learned about this Diamondbacks team throughout my decades of fandom, it's that you just never know until they play the game. It's a different story every single time, but they're going to be there to tell it. It's the PHNX Diamondbacks crew, of course. Derek Montilla, Jesse Friedman, Damon Dawg. Plug away, boys. I know you got post games coming up. It's the end of the season. Vibes are still high on the show.
Vibes are high.
So
Vibes are high. We're
where
still
can they find you?
We're still talking about the offs, and of course, you can follow us over at PHNX_D-backs. We'll be doing a lot of post-game shows between now and the end of the season, as well as we will be here for you all throughout the playoffs and beyond that. So make sure you join us.
And make sure you subscribe to PHNX Sports, as that's where you're going to find that show live. And, of course, all the additional content on the record that Jesse does, catching up with other beat reporters before every series. And, of course, you can find Southwest Bias there as well. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like this video. And, of course, make sure you tune in later this week for another edition of Southwest Bias.
Get that stuff out of here. It's Southwest Bias.